Awakening of Consciousness, lecture given by Samael Aun Weor. The schools and authors who fight each other are innumerable. Those schools abound everywhere. There is a labyrinth drawn on the floor in the Chartres Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris. Let us remember the labyrinth of the island of Crete. At the centre of that labyrinth was the Cretan Minotaur. It is said that Theseus managed to find his way to the middle of that labyrinth until he reached where the Minotaur was, and facing him in a hand-to-hand combat, he defeated him. The way out of that labyrinth was possible through Adrian's thread, which could take one to the final liberation. It is interesting that precisely on the floor of the Cathedral of Notre Dame de Paris, this wonderful labyrinth was drawn. Undoubtedly, all of this invites us to reflect. To direct ourselves through the labyrinth of theories is more bitter than death. It is not an easy thing. While some authors tell you that breathing exercises are magnificent, others tell you that they are harmful. While some affirm one thing, others affirm another. Each school presumes that it has the truth, and the labyrinth is therefore very difficult. When one manages to reach the labyrinth, one has to engage in hand-to-hand combat with the Cretan Minotaur, that is, with one's own ego, with the I, with the myself, with the self-will, and only one manages to get out of the centre of the labyrinth by means of Adrian's thread, which should lead us to the light. But most people get lost in the labyrinth of so many theories, so many schools, and so many confusions. How are we guided? How? Obviously, we should be interested in the awakening of the consciousness. Only in this way can we truly walk successfully inside that mysterious labyrinth. But as long as we have not awakened, we will be confused. Some get excited about these studies for a moment, but thereafter abandon them. There are those who, with their heads full of theories, believe they have already discovered the secret path, even if their consciousness is astoundingly asleep. It seems incredible, but there are masters of the Great White Lodge, true Gnostics in the transcendental sense of the word, radically awake, absolutely self-realized. In alchemical language we would say, subjects who already have the precious gem in their possession. And nonetheless, they do not know how to read or write, absolutely illiterate, but indeed self-realized and awake. Conversely, we see on the path of life within various schools and denominations and sects, orders, etc., subjects with their heads stuffed with theories, individuals with rich learning, but with their consciousness completely asleep, learned ignoramuses, who not only do not know, but what is even worse, they do not even know that they do not know. They are lost upon having completed their 108 existences. They enter the submerged evolution of the infernal worlds, but they believe that they are doing very well indeed. And when they are questioned, they show a surprising erudition, sparkling minds with bright concepts, with luminous, forceful, and definitive proverbs. But what good is all of that? First of all, we need to wake up. This in order to know how to guide ourselves. What good would it do to us to have our heads stuffed with words if we continue with our consciousness asleep? It would be better to liberate, but awake. Unquestionably, my dear brothers and sisters, the first thing we need is to know that we are asleep. Unfortunately, although I am stating it here, and although you are accepting that you are asleep, you do not have cognizance of being asleep, and that is precisely what is serious. Anyone can know that 2 + 2 is 4, but it is another thing to have cognizance that 2 plus 2 is 4. There are extremely simple truths that anyone intellectually repeats and thinks one knows, thinks one is cognizant of them, but one does not have cognizance of them. If we really want to be awake, we have to start by recognizing that we are asleep. When someone recognizes that he is asleep, it is a complete sign that he is already beginning to awaken. Listen, it is not about recognizing it intellectually, no. Anyone can automatically say, yes, I am asleep, but to have cognizance that one is asleep is another thing. Thus that's the difference. There is a great difference then between the intellect and the consciousness. In the practical world, we have to learn how to determine specific, intelligent associations for life in the superior worlds. During the misnamed vigil state, we are associated with all human beings, whether through work or at home or on the streets, etc., etc. During the hours of sleep, there are also associations, and these are the specific outcome of those that we have in the physical world. For example, if subject XX, no matter who, lives in the tavern, obviously his associations will be with the drunkards. And in the internal worlds, during the hours of sleep and after death, his life will be that of a tavern, related to taverners, with bums of all kinds. If someone associates with thieves and bandits in his daily life, then in the internal worlds, during the hours of sleep, he will continue among bandits and thieves. So we must determine here and now in the physical world the kind of associations we want, and during sleep and after death. By being gathered here, it suits us, because the outcome will be that we will associate also during the hours of sleep and after death. It is very beautiful to be associated during the hours of sleep right here in this temple, studying the mysteries of life and death. It is very nice to be associated with each other, dedicated to the same study after death. But that is only possible if we meet frequently. So we ourselves must cause the kind of associations we want. We ourselves must provoke the kind of associations we want to have during sleep and after death. Once that is understood, we will establish very strong foundations for the awakening of the consciousness. We need to learn how to live, my dear brothers and sisters, because it so happens that human beings do not know how to live, and that is very serious. We do not measure time. We believe that our physical body is going to last us an eternity, when really it lasts almost nothing. It turns to dust. The theatre, the cinema, is something that causes very serious damage to the human psyche. In other times, for example, in Babylon, the theatre was completely objective. Its sole objective was the study of karma and the illustration that should be given to the attendees. The actors did not memorize any role. Someone appeared on the scene without having studied any role. That one was honestly self-examining himself, with the aim of knowing what he wanted the most. Thus, on the stage, what he desired the most was what he was talking about. Suppose that he wanted to drink, then he sincerely exclaimed, "I want to drink." Another XX, who appeared out there, when listening to that phrase, explored himself, to see what he felt inside himself and what he felt. He replied, "I do not want to drink. Because of alcohol I went to jail. Because of alcohol I am in misery." That was what had really happened to him, that he wasn't going to make a false claim. Any third party, because for that they always had a group of actors, ipso facto also appeared. He was not going to say anything other than what he felt in the depths of his consciousness, something that he had lived, that was related to what the former two were saying. I had a lot of money, a beautiful home, a wife, some children, but because I was drinking wine, see how I turned out, ladies and gentlemen. Beyond appeared, O poor woman, another artist. Quote, I lost my son because of drinking. I lost my son because of that damned liqueur. And so a drama began to unfold, an improvised scene. Many times it could end in the most dramatic way. Scribes rigorously wrote down not only the development of the drama itself, but even the final results. Afterwards they selected the best of that piece, and in this way they came to know the karmic results of this or that scene. There were many scenes, love scenes, war scenes, but in all of them the spontaneous, the natural always arose. Not something that the intellect artificially invented, no. What emerged is what each of the actors had experienced. That was objective art in Babylon. So really, my dear brothers and sisters, the actors were very different. Music duly instructed the emotional brain. It was special music. They knew perfectly well that in the human organism there are, let's say, certain ganglia that have been formed with the sounds of the universe, and they knew how to handle all of those ganglia, all those parts of the being, through the different musical combinations. Thus, this is how they instructed through music the emotional brain. You know that a war march makes one want to march, that a funeral music inspires one to meditate, to reflect. Romantic music brings back memories of times gone by, etc., etc., and the nights of love. They clearly combine sounds to wisely instruct the emotional brain as well. You see, how interesting. The center of movement also used to receive teachings through sacred dances. Those dances were very important in Babylon. Each movement was equivalent to a letter, and the set of letters contained certain sentences, certain theses, certain antithesis, certain instructions. Thus, the entire auditorium received a rich culture. It was another type of theatre. The artists were not called artist, but Orpheus, which interpreted means subjects to who feel, with complete precision, the activities of the essence of the consciousness. But after the Greco-Roman culture, the theatre degenerated, and the Orpheus disappeared, and then the so-called comic artists arose, the actors. I remember very well that about 50 years ago, a little more or less, actors were commonly called comedians, and they were looked at with great contempt. By the Middle Ages, there was a law enacted that forced male actors to shave, to remove all signs of masculinity. For what purpose? With this one. In the first place, they had to, of course, put on makeup according to the drama they had to perform. Second then, above all, they wanted to make them stand out from the rest of the people. They knew that these modern actors have, let's say, a dangerous, infectious, highly Hasnamusian irradiation. Thus, by shaving, by removing the signs of masculinity, one could avoid passing near them or shaking their hands. If you carefully observe the life of the so-called theatre artists, you will feel, and if you are a little sensitive, you will be able to catch the type of Hasnamusian radiations that they emit, and that infect the minds of people. Today that custom has passed. There is no longer any law promulgated in this sense against them. Because broke through all of this and are now considered equals, that doesn't stop them from emitting their Hannes-Musian undulations, which are terribly dangerous. Naturally, they learn completely subjective memory, roles of things that have existed or have never existed, comedies, dramas that may or may not have any reality, that are only productions of their minds, and the honourable public before the stage panels and screens sleeps terribly. When I say sleep, I put it in quotes. I therefore want to affirm emphatically that the consciousness of those who attend enters into the deepest torpor due to sleep. Unquestionably, this type of subjective art really comes to finish the possibility for real perceptions. What is the Turiya? A Turiya is an initiate who can talk with their own inner God, face to face. Well, this art of subjective type really prevents us from reaching the state of Turiya. Therefore, it is pernicious. In the name of the truth, I tell you that personally, I absolutely do not like movies or television. Whenever out of curiosity I have been watching something on television, afterwards I have had a horrible pang of conscience. I have had to proceed to clean all the elementaries that were formed in my aura, and I am not calm again until I disintegrate the last of them, because it so happens that when seeing those scenes, later with the mind one automatically repeats what one saw, and then the essence takes the shape in the mind, with the essence of the mind, as Mr. Leadbeater said. Elementaries are formed, elementaries just like the ones one has seen on the screen, which still part of one's consciousness, which come to vampirize one's own consciousness. Those elementaries already established in the mind caused a lot of damage. They still, I repeat, part of one's own consciousness. They become living creatures with oneself. I repeat, when I have been watching television or cinema, afterwards I have had to suffer a lot, disintegrating the elementaries that were forged in my mind. They were formed, and I finally managed to disintegrate them based on conscious work and voluntary suffering. For this reason I definitely gave up television and cinema, all of that. I explain this to you so that you know how to guide yourselves, because if one truly wants to be awake, one has to know how to live. If one wants to function with cognizance in the internal worlds, to become a competent investigator of life in the superior worlds, one obviously has to improve one's associations. Associations like one we have at this moment, we are meeting in full assembly, are extraordinary. We are talking about the awakening of the consciousness, and that is magnificence, because we are promoting extraordinary associations in the superior worlds. As you now go to your homes, as your sleeping bodies fall into your respective beds, you will obviously leave the body, and as you leave the body, it is clear that you will come to meet each other again. In the same way that we are gathered tonight here in the physical plane, we will also gather there in the astral plane, for the same thing, that is, for the study of the awakening. And it is clear that in the astral you will receive the help of the masters of the esoteric fraternity. Therefore, you are promoting extraordinary associations for the superior worlds. If you are not here in a tavern, in a gambling house, in a cabaret, then, when your bodies go to sleep tonight, the essence of each of you outside, that is, your internal values already outside, would meet again. They would be associated, but it would no longer be to study the awakening of consciousness. Thus, this is how your consciousness will awaken, and finally one day it will be completely awake. Once the consciousness awakens, we will be sufficiently prepared to see the path of ourselves, the path that will really lead us to final liberation. But how could we see the path for ourselves if we do not make an effort to be awakened? Can the sleeping ones see the path? So we need to be awake, right? When one wakes up, one understands what one is. One makes an inventory of what one has left over and what one lacks. Many faculties that one believes that one has, one does not have, and much that one does not know one has, one really has. But one can only come to take this inventory of oneself when one is awake, because one who is asleep, how is he going to take an inventory of himself? What does the sleeping one know about himself? Thus awakening is fundamental, vital, but in order to wake up, you have to know how to live. This is why it is written, "Whosoever keeps company with wolves will learn how to howl." We have to know who we hang out with what kind of associations we are going to create in practical life. We must know how to select our friendships, because that is definitive. As we strive to live independently, the consciousness will become more and more awake, until finally one day it will be able to wake up completely. Upon awakening we can realize the sorry state we are in. As human, normally the humanoid has only the human planetary body. What is the human planetary body? The physical body with its vital seat, that is clear. Thus, beyond our physicality, the only thing that exists is a sum of inhumane psychic aggregates, our own psychological defects which adopt, let's say, allegorical forms: anger, greed, lust, envy, pride, sloth, gluttony, etc., etc., etc. What continues after physical death? What continues is a sum of psychological aggregates. If we say that after physical death a lot of devils continue, we are not exaggerating, it is true. Let us call them anger, greed, envy, etc., etc. But that's what continues. Certainly, we could say that we do not possess a permanent center of consciousness, no. Unfortunately, the essence is bottled up among all those inhumane aggregates. Therefore, there is no permanent individuality in the intellectual animal mistakenly called human. Individuality is something to be achieved. If we want to individualize ourselves, we must de-egotize ourselves. Only 3D egotization is individualization acquired. In what way could we de-egotize ourselves? We de-egotize ourselves by eliminating the inhumane elements that we carry inside. How could we remove them? Only after having comprehended them. We can, for example, know that we are angry, but we have no cognizance that we are angry. That is different. We have to become cognizant of the process of anger. Anger has many metamorphoses and many roots. There is anger because of the tongue. There is anger because of our mood. There is anger because of the word. Better said, because of the mind. These are different forms of anger. There are forms of anger that are due to self-esteem. Someone offends our self-esteem and we feel anger. There are angers that are due to jealousy. There are attacks of anger caused by hatred, etc., etc. All these aspects of anger must be investigated, not from a merely intellectual point of view. It is not about investigating anger in an abstract manner, but rather our own particular anger, which is different. If we go down the street, for example, and suddenly someone insults us for no reason and we react furiously, it is obvious that when we get home we must reflect, why did I react in that way? What was causa aurum to have reacted that way? Become cognizant of that aspect of anger. Any other day we had an attack of anger due to jealousy. We'll have to reflect on that jealousy. Why was that jealousy provoked? And so, this is how we know every facet of our anger. The same must be extended or carried to all the other defects that we carry within. Elimination is only possible with the help of the Divine Mother Kundalini. Someone can comprehend that he has a defect, a psychological defect, and yet continue with it. Elimination is different, and this is only possible by eliminating it with the help of the Devi Kundalini. The highest degree of Devi Kundalini's power is found in sex. This does not mean that for the reason that an individual does not have a wife, or a woman does not have a husband, they will not eliminate their errors. Of course, they will always have the help of their mother Kundalini. What I want to say is that the main force of Devi Kundalini is in sex, and that if someone is lucky enough to have a wife or a woman to have a husband, they may well work in the forge of the Cyclops and ask Devi Kundalini during the sexual act to eliminate this or that psychological defect that has previously been duly comprehended. This is how we are dying from instant to instant, from moment to moment. First of all, it is necessary to become aware of what the death of the ego means. The basis, the foundation of any progress lies in death, because only with death comes the new. If the germ does not die, the plant is not born. It so happens that most of the esoteric students forget about psychological death. They only think about perfecting themselves, acquiring powers, whatever, but forgetting about psychological death. If one goes to the cinema, this means that one forgot about the psychological death, right? Because when one wants to die within oneself, one doesn't go to the movies. One is no longer interested in movies, because I have seen that a dead person, a corpse struck in a coffin, is interested in cinema. If one is being distracted very well by television, one is proving over and over again that one has forgotten about the psychological death, because no corpse is going to sit down and watch television. This thing about self-realization is something very serious. It cannot be taken for granted. It is self-realization that we want. The base is psychological death. In the Gnostic Church we see that a great coffin is never lacking. Precisely, one of the chambers of the Gnostic Church is the mortuary chamber. There one sees a picturesque and most beautiful coffin. In the Masonic lodges too, a coffin is never missing. It is unfortunate that here we do not have a coffin, when there should be one. A coffin should be here visibly right, because it's a very important symbol. In any case, the coffin, even if it is small, is the living symbol that we are ready to die psychologically, that it is necessary to die psychologically in order for our being to be. Do not forget death. With good reason, the monks of the Carthusian monastery in Spain have a very special greeting. Brothers, we soon are going to die. The other monk answers, Brother, we already know that. That is their greeting every time they meet. Brothers, we soon are going to die. Brother, we already know that. Meaning we are not interested in the death of the physical body. We can lose such body when we leave the house. At any time, in the same bed we can fall from the bed to the floor and die. Slipping on a banana peel on any street can kill us. Thus physical death is not important. What interests us is the death of the ego, of the myself, that self-will that we have inside that makes us dreadful. If you were awakened, you could evidence what I am telling you. The radiations carried by every person who has the ego are very similar to those of Count Dracula, sinister. When I am in meditation, for example, alone, and someone who is ego comes by from a distance, I feel their vibrations that are sinister. They are the same as Count Dracula. They are unpleasant, sinister, leftists. The ego makes us truly unclean in the fullest sense of the word. Thus, when one manages to eliminate the ego, that is, when one manages to disintegrate all the inhumane elements that one carries inside, one remains then, indeed, radically awake, 100% awake. That's obvious. Yet it is also necessary to clothe ourselves with the superior existential bodies of the being, be well dressed, with a nice car and money in the pocket. A certain instruction received on past nights comes to the mind at this time. There, in the astral world, I had to experience a very interesting scene. It made me feel like I was being persecuted, even though I was conscious, but some venerable ones provoked a scene of persecution. Suddenly, enclosed in a certain house, I was visited, and all of them, the venerable ones of the esoteric fraternity, singing, instructed me in a delectable manner. They told me then that the persecution of the law, not referring to these earthly laws but to the laws of karma, only comes to pass when one is not well dressed and in a luxurious car. That is to say, if you go well dressed in a magnificent car and with good money in your pockets, then the persecutions conclude. I am speaking in a language that you have to know how to understand. What car were the venerable ones referring to? To that car, the Merkaba. What is that car? That chariot is made up of 4 bodies, the physical, the astral, the mental, and the causal. That's that car. In Kabbalah, when you hear about the Merkaba, the chariot, it refers to the 4 bodies. Well-dressed. What is meant by a well-dressed personage in a rich chariot in Kabbalah? It means the one who has manufactured the superior existential bodies of the being, and who even more has Christified them. That's a well-dressed personage. And if he has good money in his pocket, what is the meaning of that saying? It meant that he has cosmic capital. That cosmic capital is achieved by doing good deeds, by working for humanity. It is obvious that nobody is going to persecute a master like the Count of Saint Germain, Jesus of Nazareth. Why would the lords of karma persecute him? Who is going to persecute Jesus of Nazareth? They persecute the indignant, the wretched one who walks around badly dressed, on foot, homeless and without money. Who is the unhappy, poorly dressed pauper? The beggar. Who would it be? The one who has not manufactured the superior existential bodies of the being, namely, any bibliophile who reads the Excerpts, Vincent and all indignant, Wolfgang and all the wolves of the gang. Those are victims of the law. Don't you see them? They go from here to there, always in misfortune. They are born without knowing how, and they die without knowing why, always blindfolded from the cradle to the grave. They get married, they have children, they live in the most miserable poverty, always unhappy, always persecuted. Therefore, when one dresses well, has a nice car, and good money in the pocket, the persecution is over. Who would pursue Count Cagliostro? Not even the famous Louis XV could do anything against him. Louis XV locked him in Bastille, no doubt, but do you think that Count Cagliostro was going to remain locked up there in the Bastille, a man who managed the gin states? At times he would be there, and at times he would be in Rome, in Paris, in London, everywhere except in the Bastille. When Cagliostro came out of the Bastille 2 months later, he came out regally, splendidly dressed, stuffed with gold and diamonds, wherever he pleased, smiling merrily at the crowds. 10,000 people carried it on his shoulders. He was a winner, right? They say that they put him in jail and that he died in jail. That is false. Nobody knows what happened with Count Cagliostro. And what shall we say of Count Saint Germain, of Altotas, the great initiate? He still lives, always fought, never defeated. So then, brothers and sisters, let's dress well, and everything will change for us. Let's have a beautiful car, and you will see a better life. Obviously, we have to make that car. We will start with the astral body, that is necessary. For that you have to use the sacred sperm. Unfortunately, ordinary people do not know how to appreciate the value of their sperm. They spend it, miserably extract it from their organism. That is where all the power with which they can change their entire lives and become gods is. They throw it away as if it was nothing. They ruin themselves, they condemn themselves to disgrace. But if that sperm is transformed, if it becomes energy, things change, because it is with that very subtle energy of sex with which we are going to elaborate the astral body. Once that body has been formed, we can travel with it consciously and positively. You know you have an organ when you use it. We know that we have hands and arms because we move them. We know we have feet because we walk with them. That's obvious. Likewise, when one allows himself the luxury of manufacturing an astral body, one knows that he has it because he can use it, because he can move with that body in a positive and dynamic manner. The same happens with the mental body. It must be manufactured by transmuting the sperm into energy. People do not have a mind of their own. We need to create an individual mind of our own. It can only be created by transforming sperm into energy, and finally build the body of the conscious will to handle all circumstances. Whosoever is a victim of circumstances does not possess the body of the conscious will. One has to learn how to determine the circumstances, not that the circumstances to determine one. Whosoever is still determined by circumstances is like a log thrown into the raging waves of the ocean. That one is a victim of all calamities. One needs to learn how to determine circumstances, and that is only possible by creating the body of conscious will. Such a body is created by transforming the sperm into energy. It is with that very subtle energy of the being with which the body of the conscious will is going to be created. Those four bodies, physical, astral, mental, and causal, constitute the chariot. With the car created, all that remains is for the driver to enter that car. Who is the driver of the car? Our very own being. But our being is not going to enter a car that does not exist. You have to create the car. So when we receive the being, he remains as the Lord in his car. A well-dressed gentleman with a magnificent chariot, well-dressed with the superior existential bodies of the being, with the sacred vestments, a precious chariot. He is no longer a victim of circumstances. Whosoever gets to have those bodies must aspire a little more, that one must Christify them, and many works have been written about Christification. The Christified bodies are extraordinary. Any Christified subject, in fact, is a great human who can be said to be well dressed, and is no longer a victim of circumstances, no longer persecuted by the law of destiny. He becomes Lord in the fullest sense of the word. In other times, humanity lived according to a certain principle that allowed it to preserve the body until the moment in which it had manufactured the superior existential bodies of the being. But at that time, humanity fulfilled the cosmic duty. What is the cosmic duty? To live always in an individual who reads a book 500 kilometers per hour, page to page, stands already now, ruining the intellectual brain. He is not fulfilling his cosmic duty. In the name of truth, I tell you this: when I study a book, I reflect deeply on the paragraph I am studying. I meditate on that paragraph, and I do not go on to the next until I have become aware of the paragraph I have read. If I have not comprehended it, I do not go to the next, because it is absurd to continue. So one must make himself cognizant of what one reads. That is part of one's cosmic duty. We continue with the emotional center. Letting oneself be carried away by violent emotions is absurd. Scandalous scenes are seen in bull rings. Women who in the wildness of their passions take off their underwear along with their shoes and throw them at the bullfighters. Thus they go perfectly mad. Men doing barbarities and finally carrying the bullfighter on their shoulders like a great man when he is nothing more than a poor fool. Horrible things are seen at football matches. Soccer players often end up in a pitched battle. Why? If the motive is examined, we find that it is imbecile, absurd. There are Mexicans who justify soccer. They say that we owe soccer to our ancestors, that the Aztecs played it. There are those who, when visiting the Aztec ruins, say, yes, here they also had the ticket offices where they sold the tickets. That is false. The soccer ball represents the sun among the Aztecs, and when they had their game, it represented the struggle of light with darkness. It was a previously studied ritual movement. You see there, inside the cathedrals, and it was part of the liturgy directed by the priest to symbolize the fight between the powers of light and the darkness. But that silly little game of soccer players has no tradition, except that one of a poor fool, also in England, who one day had the idea of filling one of those beef rubber bladders with air, and then he inflated it. When the balloon was inflated, he wrapped it in a piece of leather, sewed it up, and started kicking it. Well, a few days later it happened that everywhere in London the press protested because many ladies had their hats knocked over with those balls. The glass of the houses became pieces. The police intervened, but it was not possible to put an end to that vice. It spread worldwide. Now soccer is very serious. They say, since they have made it serious to turn serious, the nonsense of a tramp, of a guy who had no job in London, that is most stupid. Question by disciple: with what elements are the superior existential bodies of the being going to be formed? Answer by Samael Aun Weor: with Mercury. It would only serve for the formation of the superior existential bodies of the being if the mercury has previously been fertilized by sulfur. Mercury needs to be fertilized by sulfur. That is all. End of lecture.